it has absolutely changed the way I do business, the way I interact digitally, the way I share and distribute content. And so I think sharing that opportunity and those tools with as many people as possible is important. And as you'll see, some of the things that we're working on are going to be very disruptive, and WordPress allows for a lot of disruptive potential. And that's one of the things I really like about WordPress. You're fine. We are sitting here with Mason James. Mason, how long have you been working with WordPress?
8 years.
8 years on WordPress. And he is the founder of Valet.io, and is formerly WordPress, WP Valet, if any of you guys are familiar with that. And the format of these are going to be, essentially, we're going to go 20, 25 minutes, first half-ish of the hour is just going to be a straight interview. After that, we'll invite anybody who would like to ask questions and interact with Mason, or who would like to dive deeper into a specific topic, to ask a question, and it'll turn into more of a conversation after that point, right? So let's talk a little bit about, because you're fairly well established in the WordPress game now, but it wasn't always like that, right? So let's go all the way back, because I think most people in this room are probably interested in how you got to where you are, right? Most of us are not at that level with our WordPress business, and we would like to grow, and that's kind of the concept of making money with WordPress is the concept of this talk. And so let's go all the way back to Mason James 8 years ago when you're just getting started out. What did that look like? What did, talk about the services you offered. How many people? Was it just you? Did you start out as a one-man freelancer that just evolved into an agency, or how did that go?
Yeah, good question. I did start out as a freelancer, just building sites, and stumbled on WordPress as the tool of choice in my own freelance services here locally, doing websites for local businesses. Over the course of the first few years, I began to see that I had as many, if not more, requests coming in from current site owners. Like, I built this website, here you go, it's all good, we're signed off. And I'd move on the way you do as a freelancer, project to project. But over time, I had more and more folks coming in who had follow-up things they wanted done. They're now established, things are going pretty well, but they're having an issue. Something's broken, they updated something, or they installed something, they weren't quite sure, exactly what it was, and now things aren't working right. Or they got really popular, and their site, they're sending out 500,000 emails a week, and their site's going down. Why is that happening? Those are really just basic questions that business owners have about their site, and they didn't have a resource for that. And I felt, I just felt bad that they needed help, and so I would try to, work extra hours, stay up late, trying to fix their site on top of the projects I was doing, and not really billing for it, right? Like, not sending out invoices for those, quick questions here and there, and that wasn't sustainable. I couldn't do both. And I thought, boy, if businesses had a place where they could just sort of outsource their CTO, or just have a BFF that is totally into WordPress, right? That would be awesome. And I couldn't find a company that did that. I wanted to do that. It's literally just, that was a problem I had. And knew I didn't want to be a full server admin, like stack manager. That's not my skill set, and so that wasn't an option. And 2009 is sort of when, at least to me, I saw companies like Pagely, WP Engine, Pressable was one of the early ones that came onto the market, and they offered managed WordPress hosting. And I thought, awesome. If that problem's solved and I don't have to be a server admin, I know I can rock WordPress all day long. So that kind of led to building WP Valet and going, yeah, let's just try this and see if that's something people want to do.
So in WordPress now, right, everyone can look back now and say, oh, WordPress is the thing. But I remember even just a few years ago, people were saying, oh, WordPress is not the CMS, right? It's not the thing. It's actually specifically not the thing if you're looking for scalable internet infrastructure, right?
Yep.
And so how 8 years ago do you see that and decide, no, I'm going into WordPress? Especially as a one-guy shop, because you probably at that point can't see where you're headed, right? You don't see that this is 8 years down the road. And so talk about making that decision, the technology stack, and how you decided to get into like WordPress itself.
So WordPress itself, I actually got started with what used to be a fork of WordPress called WordPress MU. That's really where I started, and I loved the idea that I could manage multiple sites with the same core set of software. So it's just a WordPress installation, but I can manage a few different sites and have, just the fewer variables you have, the easier it is to, run a thing. So I liked that, and I had a site for. It's actually a mental health clinic here locally that had 3 locations, and they wanted 3 completely different portals for those locations. So I needed 3 sites, and WordPress MU was the route that I chose. I don't think I would even recommend that necessarily now to a company that wanted 3 different portals for their locations, but that was at the time what I decided to do. And because it was a smaller community, that's now all in WordPress core, but even that was sort of a smaller niche. What I found was that community was really open and really available to answer my questions, and I had thousands and thousands of questions. So the smaller community led to more access, allowed me to learn things more quickly, and there definitely was and continues to be a huge demand for WordPress resources.
Yeah.
So seeing that was way easier to get involved with than Joomla or Drupal at that time, and substantially less learning curve, that was kind of what led me down that road.
So you said something about the community, and one of the things that really sucked me in about WordPress is that community aspect, right? I went to, actually this weekend is WordCamp Miami. I went to WordCamp Miami last year for the first time, and that was the first time that I had interacted with anybody really outside of like my scope of what WordPress had been up to that point. And so to be able to interact and engage with that community. So let's talk about how have you evolved in that community, because the WordPress community has grown, and you guys have done a good job of staying part of that community and staying active in that community. So before we jump into like how you started scaling the business, let's talk a little bit about that WordPress community and how important that is to the whole process of everything, right? Because WordPress wouldn't exist if it weren't for that open source community of people like
100%.
you.
Yeah. You can't really under or overstate the value of the community to the success of the businesses that run on WordPress, I think. Miami is a great one. I'm going this weekend. That was my first WordCamp, was there in, I think, 2008 or 2009, was in Miami. And it was my first time like meeting in person other nerds that I only knew online. And it was awesome.
Yeah.
These people that I'd never met online actually were exactly the way I thought they were from online interactions. And that was also, WP Engine was there at the time, and I actually ended up at the same hotel as one of their co-founders, and we ended up sharing a car back and forth, and in those conversations is when I thought this idea for WP Valet has some legs to it.
Yeah.
So it's been foundational for me every step of the way.
How do, since this is, I imagine there'll be some intermediates and maybe people here in the room want to know, how do people get involved at early level in the community, right? What's the easiest way? Because not everyone's a developer in the WordPress community, and a lot of people think, oh, I'm not a developer, I can't write code, therefore I can't be a part of the community. So talk about how people can get involved in the community, specifically, obviously developers can get involved in writing code, but how can others, and where can people kind of plug into that community?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have some contributions to a lot of WordPress projects. Maybe one of them actually has code in it. Most of my contributions have been either on the support side of things, answering questions. Every step, everything that you learn is something someone else doesn't know yet. And so you, just by sharing that knowledge or by watching things like the WordPress.org forums and responding to questions where you're like, hey, I know the answer to that, you're contributing to WordPress and you're contributing to the community. Documentation is also a fantastic way to get started. That's very much what I did the first couple of years that I was involved. Was I would get a piece of software and, oh, this is really awesome, but the step-by-step instructions for getting it were lacking. And so just writing documentation saying, hey, here's a much more step-by-step workflow for you. That's an incredibly valuable resource to the community and to, again, people who are just starting out.
Yeah. Let's get let's dive into the actual business part, right? So 34% of the American workforce right now is a freelance economy, right? And it probably wasn't that big 8 years ago. I can guarantee it wasn't even close to that big 8 years ago. I don't have the stats on what the growth has been over that time, but freelancers also make on average 22% less than their full-time counterparts. But the appeal of being on your own and doing your own thing and becoming your own boss, that becomes, and maybe the potential for growth beyond that freelance rate, right? So let's talk about breaking that gap. How did you get from being just a freelancer to starting to run a business to bringing your first employee in? Let's talk a little bit about that process.
Okay. Well, I definitely didn't have a business model and plan when I started out. Very frankly, I just went to my customer base, my customers as a freelancer, and said, if you want monthly ongoing help, it's either $450 or $900 a month. I completely made those numbers up. That was just what I thought I would like to have. My goal was to take a full-time gig that I had and completely replace that income with my own thing at WP Valet. So the numbers, those numbers have proven to be pretty great. But that originally that was just my goal. I know that I as a person can handle this many clients. So to make the amount of income I need to be sustainable, I need to charge X. Yeah. Right? I knew I couldn't manage 5,000 or 10,000 customers, so it wasn't going to be appealing to me. So I was like, we're going to charge more. We're going to make it a very hands-on, white glove service, and that's mostly what we did for the first year.
How did you find those first few clients, right? Because you said you were doing a little bit of WordPress, and how did you get those first few clients to get to the point where you had that base so that you can ask, will you guys pay this, or then get them on those monthly rates?
Right. So it was very much because WP Valet has only been around for 3.5, it'll be 4 years this year. So this was like 4 years into already working in WordPress and in the community. So I had a client base. I had a whole bunch of clients, and I had nothing like MailChimp lists or anything. I mean, I literally went through my Gmail and grabbed everyone that I thought might possibly be willing to talk to me about ongoing services and emailed them individually.
Yeah.
And said, hey, I'm doing this. Would you like to participate?
Sure. Let's talk about that a little deeper dive, because I think that might be interesting to people who are especially just starting out. And that is the process of prospecting and maybe finding those initial leads, right? And everybody right now, it seems like everybody wants a WordPress guy, and it seems like almost websites have become commoditized, and so everyone, especially now, WordPress is free, right? Mm-hmm. And so everybody thinks, oh, well, WordPress is free. How come you have to charge me to work with it? Or how come, it costs me so much money to do X, Y, or Z? And so can you dive a little bit into that early? How did you identify those prospects? Because, man, so much has happened in 8 years, in 4 years, right? So you spent the first 3.5 years then freelancing, and then started making this progression into, okay, I'm going to start a business out of this, right? Maybe you're making enough money. Were you working in software development before that? What were you doing right before that?
Right before that, actually, I worked with my brother in a video production company here locally, and got into web work because the economy was not doing so well, and some of the local businesses that we were working for also wanted websites. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I can get your video on the web. And that was it. I told them I could. They paid for it, so now I needed to do it.
Yeah.
And WordPress turned out to be the platform.
But doesn't that then become the case so often that people are just like, bite off more than I can chew, and then as you're chewing, you're like, I don't know. Yeah. And then maybe you end up calling someone like you, right, or calling your friend. And so you just leverage your existing network at that time, right?
Right.
Friends, and because LinkedIn wasn't around for you to start scooping around.
No, we didn't, and still don't do a whole lot of social network stuff. I think that's one of the areas we're weakest, because I'm just personally pretty weak there. I tweet about my dog and food, not business strategy. But yeah, so we didn't have any of that. We formed strategic relationships early on with what we call partners or vendors that we knew their customers had the same problem. So support is it's a very challenging thing. Everyone from GoDaddy and Media Temple to newer companies like WP Engine and Pagely and Pantheon, they all have customers that have support questions. And the answers to those questions might not have anything to do with the hosting platform, right? It isn't actually the hardware. It's actually something in the WordPress software side of things. So once I saw that we had something going here, I thought, well, these guys have a problem that I want to solve, right? I want to answer those support questions. I want to take that burden on and work with these customers month to month. So we started talking to hosting companies and found that there was, at that time, a little bit of a barrier to getting onto those hosting platforms. They had very specific expectations, like you're not going to modify WordPress core, which people were doing all the time. We found that quickly, that people had modified WordPress core, and so you put them onto one of these managed hosts, and the whole thing falls apart, and they don't even know why.
Yeah.
So we saw that was an issue, and so we just reached out to hosts and asked, hey, could we do some migrations for you? Could we just do that so we can be better at providing support for your customers when we bring them on your platform? And that ended up being a very large portion of our early income, and also a great first experience for potential customers.
Yeah.
Because we just did this migration. That's something that was painful and tricky and sort of mysterious. We did that, delivered. It's successful. It's easy to see that it's successful because now it's live on this new host. And then that opened the door for us to say, hey, would you like us to stick around and provide some ongoing services?
Yeah. Have you found that you guys have kind of focused into a niche, or do you still stay fairly broad? Because early on, as someone starting out, that may be a thing, right? Where you want to be a jack of all trades, or somebody says, I need this, and you're like, yeah, I can do that, I can do this, I can do, and it's like, well, next thing you know, you've got this arsenal of services that you offer, and maybe none of them are killing it, right? So,
Right.
Is it something in your experience, especially in the WordPress space, does it make sense to go specific and find a niche early, or should you be more of a generalist until you find that thing that kind of becomes that calling, or how has that experience been for you?
I think that's a challenging one to answer. For me personally, the question that we're always trying to answer is, how can we help our clients' website perform better? There are a variety of metrics and things that indicate how well a site's doing. But we always
Like
try to
what?
go back to that goal. So the main point of any website really is to have a visitor do something, to read, to watch a podcast, to convert on a form, to purchase something, to sign up for something. There's an action. There's a goal for the website. So we take that back, and we kind of have like a Maslow's hierarchy of web needs to say, these are the things, and they really need to happen in this order to build a healthy website that is achieving its goal. And at a foundational level, that starts out with speed and security. So we build off of that. Is everything stable? Is it able to scale? Is it secure? And you need to have that. If we started off with an A/B converting campaign, but the website doesn't perform well, you just wasted a ton of
Sure.
time on an ad spend for a site that keeps crashing on you.
Well, and you're testing things that may change once you figure out the other things, right?
Exactly.
So if you're A/B testing a page that takes 10 seconds to load and you get that to 4 seconds, well, your A/B test is irrelevant.
Exactly. So there's an order to it, right? It needs to be accessible. It needs to be something that people can land on and then know exactly what the action is that they're supposed to do, whether it's just reading content or it is a specific funnel. So accessibility is key. Then you can start to look at traffic and what can we do to affect the amount of traffic, the volume that we're getting. And there's lots of approaches to that, not just SEO and on-page stuff, but there's a variety, and that's where marketing comes in. And then finally, at the very top, you have the idea of conversion. Now that you've really got a stable flow for all of your traffic, what small things can you do running A/B testing to improve on those conversion rates to get people to take that action? So we look at an order to things. That means that our services are pretty broad. The overall services that we provide, they are. We'll design a logo if we think that's what's going to help the site perform better, or we'll rework the entire theme if it's not responsive and it's not loading up on mobile. We'll take a look at the ad networks, because a lot of times your site is slow not because of your server, not because of the software, but because your ad network is loading up 15 flash video ads.
Sure.
That's terrible. So it means our service base is really broad, to get back to your question. We started out with what we thought was a very narrow focus. Let's just help business owners month to month with their technical needs. But that has meant in practice, this scope of services is actually pretty broad.
Let me dive in. Let's change directions of the conversation a little bit, ask a couple more questions, and then we'll open up. Hopefully you guys have some questions in the audience here that we can get to. Sure. Let's talk about scaling, right? Because we kind of left the conversation about your growth inside of WordPress at you're just making this transition, 3.5 years as a freelancer. You're starting to recruit clients. Talk talk about hiring that first employee, right? That transition of how do you determine when? Because the biggest struggle, I think, one of the biggest things it seems as a freelancer is that once you get to that point where you're like, I'm finally making a little bit of money, but the workload's like, you're like, maybe I can hire someone else. Now you're like, I'm not making any money anymore, right? Because you're paying someone else to do those things. And hopefully then that frees you up to repeat that and add people under you and get to a point where now you've got a business that's a viable business. But talk about that transition in your context, right? How did you make that? How did you find that first right employee, making that decision there? And then we'll talk about scaling with remote employees next.
Yeah, and these are all super challenging things, and I don't know that I've figured a whole lot of it out as much as I've got a little bit of luck on my side as well. But my approach has always been to hire where I suck, hire where I'm not any good. So our first, I brought on our co-founder, my co-founder Kim. She very much is an operational, like lots of detail oriented person. She is kind of a unicorn because she can also really talk to clients well and dig in and troubleshoot things. So that was a win. But her real expertise is in the operational. We were responding to support questions via email when she came on board, and she's like, "What if we had a ticketing system?" And it was like, "Oh yeah, it's a great idea."
Makes
yeah.
sense,
So she having her on really made a difference. And then our first employee hire was actually our accountant and our accounts, because I am terrible. If it's got a $sign, it should be JavaScript, right? Like it doesn't make sense to me on a spreadsheet that way. I mean, I'm learning definitely, but it didn't early on. And I'm bad at invoicing. We did the work. Why isn't the money just there? So having people in those key positions was critical. It was later that, as we were doing a lot of specific work like migrations, that we began hiring people to do tasks and training them to sort of replace what I was doing. But the first hires were people who did things that I knew I was bad at.
Yeah.
And I'm very blind to some things, so I want somebody else that's there that is totally focused on that.
Talk about, you said something right there when you were talking about your first hire, that she was kind of a unicorn. And I know what being a unicorn means in this world, but explain
It's a compliment.
to these. Right. No, but
Yeah,
explain to this crowd
it's a
and whoever's watching. Explain what being a unicorn means.
It's someone who's really unique and special, right? Like unicorns, they don't actually exist. One thing, but like it's extremely rare to spot one. And Kim was someone who I'd worked with for a couple of years before starting WP Valet, and I knew we connected well as just individuals. And that we complemented each other in terms of strengths and weaknesses. I love vision casting. I love telling you this is how beautiful things are going to be for you. The step-by-step individual daily things are challenging. Not because I can't do them, but maybe I don't organize them well. And she's got an engineering background, and she's just incredible with handling a lot of details.
To clarify, what I was trying to get at there is the unicorn is typically somebody who develops and does design,
right,
and has an ability to kind of really do anything. The jack of all trades, the ability to get the hands dirty with the code, also get in on the front end of the design work, maybe write some things as well, and be able to articulate. And so I just wanted to clarify that concept as the unicorn. So then scaling, right? So how many employees are you at right now?
Employees, I think we have 15.
15?
And then we have 3 contractors.
Okay.
So 18 members total.
So you still work with some contractors, and then those typically become long-term relationships. Is that how your employees start out as contractors, and then they usually evolve into an employee, or?
Generally, yes. We also, the contractors right now are some of them just prefer that relationship, and that's what they want. That's fine with me. And then some of them are overseas, and overseas employment is like beyond what I understand. So so they're contractors just kind of by necessity. We definitely started with all contractors. It's been a slow move into full-time employment, but I think it's the right move for our team members, and that's what's really important, is taking care of them. So we try to operate, and even the way we structure individuals' roles and responsibilities in the company is like you're your own LLC. You're your own independent, autonomous authority on this position. But you get so you get all the benefits of that, but you also get the benefit of a W-2,
sure,
and all of those things. So
yeah, and let's talk to that a little bit, because that's a trend that's fairly new, and I think that's something that I won't say WordPress started, but WordPress has been a big part of the internet in general, has been a big part of freeing people in that context where they can become their own boss, if you will, work online, work remote, have a little bit more freedom, but still be attached to a business that gives them some of that structure, right? Because as we talked about, the freelancers make a little bit of less money, so sometimes, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and be like, oh, all the corporations are bad. Corporations actually do really good things, and
Yeah.
organizing people and creating some of those structures for those people to organize and work in is one of them. And so how does that, I'm trying to figure out how I want to phrase the question. How do you decide, first of all, whether to bring somebody on full-time from that freelancer gap? And secondly, like, what do you specifically, like, what was that biggest hurdle to just getting to the point where you started scaling, where you're like, because it probably didn't happen all at once. You probably didn't go out and hire 15 people all at once, right?
Right.
And so how does that process happen? Because it happens over and over, and then there has to be, I'm sure, some kind of system, and you get better, hopefully, at hiring the right people,
Right.
and bringing them into that full-time role, because it's easy to get rid of a freelancer. Well, easier, right? And when you bring somebody as an employee, now it's like, oh, there's things, right?
It's definitely more expensive. Yeah. I don't, you just have to do it and fail a lot. We have definitely failed many times. And I say we failed because we didn't set up expectations properly with a contractor or an employee, or we didn't have great ways to measure whether or not they were successful at that. So you don't know the things you don't know until you dive in and do it.
Right.
And so that's, I think, one of our core values as a company is tenacity.
Yeah.
And it's just, we don't know all the things yet, but we are going to get at it every single day and look at what we didn't know yesterday and improve on that.
Sweet.
So we've taken that same approach to onboarding team members and have realized, wow, we brought on a support rep, and 3 months in, they were not effective and even really hated what they were doing. What did we do wrong? What can we do better to find the right person for that role, and also find the right person that's going to fit our company culture, and then make them successful? That's challenging, and I think it's a little bit different for everyone. You just have to know you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, and not lose too much sleep about that. So.
I had one final question for you, but it lost my mind as I was listening to you close up there. At this point, I think we've tied up enough time, just you and I chatting. Let me explain how the question asking process will go. If you would like to ask a question, you can come and stand here, I guess, one at a time. You can line up just behind the couch or raise your hand, but we'd just like to make sure we get it on the mic. So does anybody have a first question for Mason, or should we continue? Yeah, come on over this way, actually, and we will have you stand right there. Yeah, perfect. And then go ahead and give us your name too.
Sure. I'm Steve Dimmick.
Okay.
Okay, Mason, you mentioned about bringing Kim on, but it kind of sounded like you said she was a co-founder. So I just wanted to clarify that transition. You had been a freelancer for a while. You had sussed out that there was a need in this marketplace. You had validated that need with certain hosting companies. And it was at that point that you kind of met up with Kim. You met Kim at some point, and then you decided to do this together?
So I started WP Valet in about 6 months before Kim came on. And that was really just me taking on a personal, let's just see if this susses out or not. And there proved to be traction and proved to be, validity to it. So when I decided I'm gonna make this a thing, I'm quitting my other things and going full time in, Kim took that leap with me. So she also left a position at a company to try this thing out. So that jumping off the ledge with me gives her co-founder status all day long. But that's the difference. Like, in my mind, I brought her on, but she was with me throughout the idea formation process, and she definitely took the risk on as well.
We follow? Nope.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any next? Nope. A question? Somebody's got to have a question for Mason for starting a WordPress business in the room. Sure. Bring it. Too valuable resource to not
Hey, thanks for talking with us. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
My name is Dan, and I'm a freelance corporate writer. In the business that you see, how much reliance on good writing goes into the overall scope of the work that you promise for your clients? And from what I've seen, there's so much bad writing on the websites that it exposes the owner of the company that, gosh, I'm not really smart because I can't write. Do you see that often, and what do you do about it?
Absolutely. To just give a short answer to that question, it's extremely undervalued and there's not enough attention given to it. A lot of times when someone's looking to launch a website, they have their internal checklist. Okay, we've got it designed, we've got our theme, we've got our WordPress installation, and it functions. Then launch the site. Very much, we just rebranded in the beginning of January. We actually had to hold our launch for a couple weeks because I was just really upset with the copy.
Yeah.
And that is something that I believe deserves its own dedicated brain cycles and a person that really understands how to write compelling copy.
Yeah.
When people are relaunching a site or building something new, I think that they underestimate the value of that. Because the most beautiful designed theme,
Right.
if it doesn't have a compelling message that backs that up, it's not nearly as valuable.
Well, let's since we don't have very many questions from the audience, let's dive into that that aesthetic a little bit, because that's, now we're jumping into my wheelhouse, which is the storytelling and the visual appeal and what the front end, right, what that feel and experience is like. And in the digital world, especially with WordPress, and I'm speaking to my case specifically, the power that it's been able to give a creative to do some of these things, right? And I think maybe that's why some of us are even in this room, is that maybe we are creative and have that ability to write and articulate ourselves visually, but maybe not be able to write the code. And so just like, you know, the development and the engineering is a solid part. Just to what you were talking about, that what do people read? What's the storyline, right? Especially now as we start moving away from very spammy sales tactics and people are getting tired of advertising and getting kind of fed up with always being sold to, right? And so I think that becomes even more important as a part, especially early on, to build credibility, right? Writing can build a lot of credibility for yourself. If you start writing useful articles, if you start writing useful resources about WordPress, about whatever your knowledge base is, about how you write, about the process of writing, those then become things that people find online that bolster their credibility for you, their belief in you, their the idea that you can actually do those things again for them, right? What's a better way to prove to somebody that you can do something than to do it for yourself? And so a lot of people run around talking about, well, I don't have experience, I don't have this, who's going to hire me? Well, go do it. I used to make up brands. Like, I would just make up brands and build fake websites so that I could have portfolio pieces, you know? And so sometimes you got to fake some of these things. And I think that as you start figuring out how to make money with WordPress and how to make money off of some of these digital resources, that becomes part of it, right? You got to become a storyteller. So how do we get...
I think the challenge is quantifying the value there.
Yes.
If somebody comes to us and they say they have $10,000 for a new website, does it make sense to spend all $10,000 on, and people have done this, spend it on a design, right? Like, they pay a top dollar designer to put this thing together, and then they have no money for development. And so they outsource the development, and what happens, the code's actually really, really crappy.
Yeah.
And it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
At the same time, they probably then didn't hire someone to do copy. Copy is one of the things that it's challenging for me, and for when I'm talking to our customers, for me to quantify. But I do have customers that have said, no, we don't want copy right now. And then they've actually, the design and dev work is all done.
Right.
They haven't launched something that will generate revenue for them because the messaging isn't right yet.
Right.
And then they've had to go back and say, okay, how can we make this happen?
And there's so many things that go into that too, right? It becomes the voice of the company, and is it consistent? And you know, I'm not a stickler for grammar and punctuation on my blog. I do as best as I can, right? But I'm not one of those guys where people be like, oh, there was that comma you missed one time on that article back then. And I'm like, I don't have a whole squad, you know? And so I don't think you got to go all the way to that level of nuance, but let's talk about some of the tools you use, because I think that might be of value for some of the people here. Some of the tools that you guys use as Valet.io to maybe manage content, right? I've heard tools like Gather Content, which actually allows you to, do a wireframe and interact with people and say, hey, this is the stuff that needs to go on the about page. Fill that out before we even start building your website, right? The content has to be there before we go, because that becomes a holdup in the development process, right? People are like, build me a beautiful website. Well, what goes on it? The architecture, the framework's there, like, right? So some of the tools maybe that could give people a heads up, maybe some of your marketing tools or some of the WordPress plugins that you have to start with these, or these are really powerful, or whatever that.
Sure. So I'll say what's interesting about what our company does, or unique, I don't know how interesting it is, but is that most of the time we're dealing with established brands. So the content piece, to some extent, is already there. And so our job is to do a redesign or retheme the site, but actually we just need to pay respect to the copy that's already there and they already really love. So doing a new website, like what we've had to do with our own website, rebranding it, was a different sort of challenge, because it was like, we're starting with a whiteboard and we can make the messaging whatever we want. We probably only do one, maybe two of those a year. Most of the time, the projects we do are iterating on something that already exists. So tools for like, okay, well, what copy is going to go where? That's not something that I think I would be a good authority on. But just in general, like tools that we use, InVision app is amazing for wireframing and creating interactive wireframes to present to clients. We use that a lot of time, during the design phase. Having a Git version flow and a plan for how you make the site live is really important. So not just here's this theme and it's beautiful, but how do you actually get that onto their site and running, and having a plan for that is critical. So we're big fans of Git and version control. WordPress plugin wise, I mean, we love all of the popular ones.
Let's run down as a. First of all, let me ask: does anybody else have any questions for Mason? Yeah.
How you doing? My name is Jim. Thanks so much for coming in and talking with us today. My question: I'm extremely a newbie at the whole WordPress thing. Like I said, when I last dealt with it, it was strictly a blog, 8 years ago. My question is, for someone who is new, who's really trying to find out as much as they can about it. My problem is finding which resources are the ones that I should trust. There's a million of them out there.
Yeah.
How do I sort through all that? Or are there specific ones I should just focus on to really get the information I need to start building a good foundation off of, instead of trying to figure out which ones are maybe full of it, don't quite know what they're talking about, etc.
Yeah, that's a fantastic
Thanks.
question, because I feel like WordPress right now is I might get in trouble, but I feel like it's a little bit like Windows XP. The environment, not the software, but the environment is very much similar to that, in that it's everywhere. That's awesome. And there's a ton of free stuff for it, right? But you could install all this free stuff, and guess what? Every time your computer starts, you're sitting there waiting 5-10 minutes because you've got a full folders jingle starting when your computer starts, and all all of this stuff that you don't need, or that just wasn't written well.
Right.
So because it's become more prolific as a software, there's just a ton of development and resources and plugins out there, and it's incredibly challenging to find the quality, well-coded modules or plugins that are going to get to your goals and be something you can rely on and that be stable. So in terms of how you figure that out, there's standard answers I hear are things like check the ratings and the community around plugins on WordPress.org. That's a good thing. I'll tell you right now, there's a community called Post Status. It's like $100 a year. WPW is a founding sponsor for that community, and that is extremely rare. If you look at where we've actually put our money into things, we don't do that a whole lot. We speak at events and we give of our time, but I don't put our dollars behind too many things. But this community is an incredibly valuable resource. I don't get anything for saying that. I'm a member. It's one of the only daily emails I get. I always unsubscribe. I hate newsletters, but this one I get because it's very focused on key WordPress news and developments, and it's extremely high quality. So just as a resource, like that Post Status is fantastic.
Yeah.
They also have a Slack channel. If you're not familiar with that, that's like chatting online. And as a member, you get access to that. And there are core WordPress developers, business owners, myself, owners of these hosting companies. We're in there during the day, and people ask questions, and you get an answer from that curated community. So, like, just as like a uncovered like a little gem
yeah.
online for WordPress, man, that's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Post Status. WP Beginner is a good one.
Yep.
In our last video, last month, we talked about how to vet some plugins, and we spent some time talking about that. Going back to maybe just some other plugins that you use, or WP Beginner is another good resource for quality WordPress stuff. WP Beginner.
Yep.
I'm trying to think from a making money with WordPress standpoint. What's the one thing you might encourage somebody starting out? Because so many times we got scope creep, and we have like, people just, oh, well, make it do this, or it's just easy to make it do that, right? And so I think a lot of times early on, people get bogged down by these requests that come in, and then that cuts into your ability to make money, right? Or you're, like you were saying, you don't get to invoice for that time necessarily all the time.
Right.
So how do you do that? How do you get to that point where you can tell somebody, nope, I'm billing you for that, or we're not giving you that for free, or standing up to a client? Talk a little bit to some of that, how you guys maybe don't deal with that now because the clients are paying for a higher level service, but earlier on as a freelancer, as a somebody starting out, that becomes a real burden. How you collect from people, and now you get them to actually pay you for the things that you're doing, and quantifying the value of the things that you do.
Yeah. So definitely having good invoicing software is good. If you don't have one, FreshBooks and Harvest are both amazing, just to get you people that will pay those invoices online, and they'll send reminders out if they don't pay. We require payment up front. Early on, services you generally pay for after the fact. Somebody cleans your home, you pay it after they're done, window washing. But when you buy a Coke, you just buy it, right? Like, because a Coke is always the same. You're always going to spend $1 to buy a Coke, and you pay before you drink it. So we took that and just applied that to our services. So anybody that comes on with Valet, the first thing that you need is an assessment, so we can understand what's going on with your site, and you pay for that, and you pay for it up front.
What do you charge for something like that?
As much as we can. We have like different levels depending on the complexity of the site.
Yeah.
So we'll take a quick look and go, you know what, this is a very small nonprofit. They're doing awesome work. It may only be a couple $100. If it's an elaborate e-commerce behemoth, it's going to be several thousands of
Sure.
dollars for that assessment, and that's just so we can tell you here's what it's going to take to support you month to month. Not everyone does that. We do it that way, and the reason is, one, so that we can really speak to and say, yeah, we can support your site. We've looked at it. We've looked at all of the code, and we know where the red flags are, and we're ready to take them on. But then, two, to set the precedent that you're going to pay up front. You're going to pay, and then work will be done. So by setting that as just, that's how it starts. There is no other option. We don't face that same, our AR still, we still have lots of outstanding
Sure.
invoices, but it generally helps us to set that so the customer just expects that that's the way it's going to work.
And then maybe too, this would be a good place to end. We're right at 50 minutes here. Quantifying the value we provide, because so often you do pay in advance for a Coke, but you can feel a Coke, and that's my Coke. I know what I'm getting, right? When you buy digital services, so often you don't know what you're getting. You're buying an intangible product, something you can't touch and feel until it's done, right? Until the website's up, then I can see it. And even then, sometimes I don't see where my money's going, right? And so in the digital game, it becomes part of quantifying and justifying those values, and that comes over time with credibility, and all those things play into it. But how, starting out, can somebody find interesting ways to justify the value that they're charging in order to get to the point where they're making money consistently with WordPress?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't think there's anything wrong with having an hourly rate and saying I cost $120 an hour, and this project is going to take me 40 hours, and so this is your price. Some people don't like to do it that way. I don't see anything wrong with that. If you're making the margins you want, that's totally acceptable, and then it's just math, all right? And so your value is the time that you spend on it. And the longer you've been in the game, the more you should charge.
So that sounds great in an ideal world, but we all know that like you're sitting across from client and you're like, I'm $100 an hour, and they're like, you know, right? And now you're like, no, I'm worth $100 an hour, and they're like, no, you're worth 50. That's what we're paying you, right? And you might be like, shit, I got to make my rent, and so maybe you're going to be a $50 an hour person. So how do you fight that, right? How do you overcome that? Because I know every freelancer deals with that. Every person starting out deals with that, where they think they're worth more than what they're going to get at the going rate.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how far along you are. I guess. I mean, you can set your rate and you can say no as much as you want to.
As
so
long
you
as you
don't
can
have
afford-
to. Yeah, as long as you can afford it and
It's-
eat, right? You can say no to those things. We also do discounted rates and say, but you're not going to be a priority. So I have work and it's full paid work. If you want this, then sure, I'll put it on the schedule. But guess what? You're going to pay now still, and I'll get to this in May. Like,
Sure.
yeah, you want a discount, that's the way it's going to work. I'm going
Sure.
to guarantee work for myself, but it's not happening today.
Gotcha.
And then it really is more about that person and then getting an honest conversation about the budget, right? You can buy lots of different cars at lots of different prices. It's the same way with websites or shoes, right? It's more about the person and what they value
Yes.
for the pair of shoes than it is you. So really, I try to learn more about them and understand, like, how valuable is this to you? What does this mean to you? And then price it accordingly.
That I think goes back to the bigger issue in that context, is not necessarily trying to justify your value, is trying to reassess that, right? So if somebody's beginning, just to go back to some sales knowledge, when you're just starting out, or if you're in that situation with somebody and you're negotiating, the idea is to get them to refocus on what they need, right? So if they want less money, you start taking things away from them, right? Oh, we can reduce the price, but you're going to get X less, right? Because this is what you want. You want the Mercedes, but you're trying to buy the Ford, right? And so that becomes another way in that context to just be able to do that. Final question I want to end with, we're doing this thing called the Unhireable Project. And so I just want to get everyone's perspective right off the bat, what you think it means to be unhireable.
Unhireable.
Like what the first thing that comes to your mind when somebody says, when somebody throws the word unhireable at you.
I mean, the first negative thing would be like an attitude. But the first positive thing would be that you're so in love with what you're currently doing, there isn't a more attractive option out there. So,
Cool.
yeah.
That's it. That's all we want. Just for people's gut reaction. We're trying to get everyone as many gut reactions as we can.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, we're doing some interesting things with that. So, thanks so much for stopping out and being part of this. Thanks guys for showing up. I don't want to commit Mason because maybe he has things to do afterwards, but it's right at 1 o'clock. If you guys got to bail, the space will be open and available to you guys. Other than that, we will be same bat channel next month.
Cool. I'm gonna stay for a little bit because I haven't had any pizza yet. So.
Oh yeah, I got to grab a slice to eat for sure. Awesome.
Good stuff,
guys. Sweet.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.